morning, everyone. It's snowing outside. How does that make you feel? Thumbs down from Raquel Richardson. Welcome to IT Leaders. This is the 36th meeting of IT Leaders. We have met every other month now since 2017. I can't believe it's been that long, frankly. It's been very personally rewarding. This meeting is about that lollipop right there on the whiteboard, you. As a leader, it's really focused on you, helping you develop your own leadership skills. Those are people skills. They have nothing to do with technology, although you might be able to use technology to help you. It's really about how you interact with people and how you do culture. I'm glad to have you here. Who are we and why are we here? This group was originally developed for managers and directors of IT and staff positions, although we often have CIOs and VPs of IT attend, depending on who the speaker is. Three focuses, as I mentioned: breakfast, good focus, networking, you talking to each other and finding out where opportunity might be and getting some insights from each other. Mentorship and leadership skills are where we focus. Bathrooms are out of order. Bad news. We tried to fix them before this meeting, but unfortunately we didn't. Kate Rance and a couple of my other teammates are here. If you need to head up to the front to use the restrooms during this meeting, just head back to the door there and someone will be there to help you and let you out and let you back in again. I apologize for that. It's only the second time it's happened in 36 meetings. And if you need to leave early, find an expedient person or me. There are our mobile numbers for the area VP and for me, who are both here locally, so just text me if you need to leave early, whether it's for the bathroom or not. How do you stay informed about what's going on here? The best way to do it is our website, itleaders.org/Indianapolis. Second best way is the LinkedIn company page, which our attendee this morning, Rusty Maynard, set up for us a couple of years ago. Those have the upcoming events and the dates. We do have dates established for the upcoming year. They're listed on the Indianapolis page for the website. I do not have my speakers nailed down. I have one of the two speakers nailed down for January, but remember, we're every other month: January, March, May, etc., and almost always on the third Tuesday. I think next year all of them are on the third Tuesday of every other month, so you'll know when to show up and get those on your calendar as quickly as you can. We also have a LinkedIn group, and I'll mention that as well. Rusty's the one who updates Indianapolis IT, that Twitter feed. It's not the best place to look for information on this event. The best place to look is the website. Please take pictures of the speakers while they're here. I don't always get a chance to get good shots. If you would, please text them to me or post them yourselves using the hashtag that's up on the screen there. I think it's valuable to spread the word. We're going to do a little bit of LinkedIn advertising next year to try to get some new people involved. We've got a lot of core people who've been attending, and there's a lot of new faces today. We want new people to come because I think it's important for them to understand that there are outlets beyond their organization where they can improve their leadership skills. So spread the word on your own. If you've got friends in this business, whether it's at church or on the soccer field or in your other social circles, please let them know about this event. It's easy to come to. There's an interesting dynamic right now that we've seen. I think it's harder for people who are working remotely to get up and come to an event like this than it is to stop here on the way to an office. That is completely my hallucination of what's going on, but I do think it's more difficult. I think there's more inertia for the 5-step commute at home than there is for the maybe 5-minute or 5-hour commute these days into the office. So it's important to be face-to-face with people. That will never change. I don't think it'll change in 100 years at least. So please remember that. The private group is, there's two things on LinkedIn that are worth talking about. The IT Leaders Indianapolis company page and the IT Leaders Indianapolis private group. The company page is another alternative for finding out what events are going on here and associated with this meeting. The private group is meant for you to communicate with each other. So we curate that list and make sure that we don't have service providers or vendors in that other than me, to make sure that you guys can communicate with each other about service providers, about candidates that you're considering for jobs, leadership questions, hiring or retention. We've had off and on use of that. Jeff Tunn, who's here, who runs the Indy CIO network, uses a mailing list or a listserv if you're old like Jeff Tunn and me. That's what we call those, or what we used to call them. So we've considered maybe switching over to that. It's a little bit more maintenance, but I would encourage you to use that no matter what. Our mentorship program started on the second meeting. So 35 meetings ago, we started our mentorship program. There's about a dozen CIOs who've expressed interest in being a mentor. So if that's of interest to you, contact me directly. I've got a one-page rules of engagement model where you get your LinkedIn profile up to date, you write down your belief system on what your career might look like, and then you reach out to one of these CIOs on LinkedIn, and then you agree to date for 3 dates, and if there's good chemistry, you can go on from there. If not, there's no commitment with either one of you, but it's a great way to be engaged. If you like the idea of being a mentor, then let me know, because we're always looking for new folks and folks who are willing to give back to the community. This is your part of the meeting. First off, let's talk about who has open positions in their organization that they're looking to fill. Anybody? Please, Allison.
NOC engineer is open at Allied Solutions.
Allied Solutions, NOC engineer, got that. Anybody else? Teresa.
Yeah, we have I work for a company called Axia Consulting, and we have multiple positions open in the Microsoft Dynamics space, finance and operations, in the Oracle Cloud space, also in the organizational change management space. And so if you have anybody that you know that's actively looking, please send them my way.
Anyone else? Open positions in the organization. We've seen a little bit of contraction in the marketplace on this. It's also the end of the year, so that tends to get freshened at the beginning of the year with most organizations, but there's always opportunity. You just need to look for it. And I'd love to chat with you if you're in transition. Speaking of in transition, who is looking for their next role? Lori?
Yeah, I'd be happy. Lori Runyon, IT leader with 20 years of experience in the healthcare industry, but looking beyond the healthcare industry for my next role. Lots of experience in informatics, project management. Culture is very important to me. I'm a people leader, people person. I put people first, so that is really important to me in my next gig. So any interest or ideas or whatever, happy to talk. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Lori. Corey.
Corey Field, I've been in IT enterprise services in the manufacturing industry for about 11 years. Looking for something either in manufacturing or kind of tangential to that, either in enterprise services, more senior level in either an architect field or MES. That's kind of my specialty. All right.
Corey's got a unique set of skills around automating factory floors and the like, so if you know someone who's looking for that IoT-oriented talent set, then Corey's a good fit. Anyone else? Ryan.
Ryan Brubaker, CIO at Seven Corners. That position's ending at the end of this year, so I'm looking for my next adventure starting next year. 25 years experience, 15 years in executive leadership. Interested in another CIO role or maybe CIO advisory services consulting. Something like that.
Thank you. Mike, did I see your hand go up?
Mike Loggins. I didn't win the Powerball 2 weeks ago, so I have to be an adult now. Was a global VP of IT over at SMC Corporation of America until July. Took a nice break and sabbatical. IT leader. I work with. I love building teams, building new things, innovating, and anything I can do to really push a company to do something different.
Thank you. Anyone else? Miss anybody? Great. Thank you all for being transparent and open. The IT Leadership Boot Camp, Lou Russell just wrapped up the fall 22 version of that. If you are a new leader or need a refresher course, this is a 101 leadership class. It's 4 4-hour sessions. Lou put it together in 4 weeks, morning sessions, and we'll probably do one in the new year. It's the best $975 you could ever spend. It's worth about double that. There is also a new IT leadership boot camp that's associated with TechPoint. Jeff, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. We just launched it about, a month and a half ago. It's a Leadership Development Academy. It runs 8 all-day sessions spread over about 4 months. So you're really meeting about every 3 weeks, but it's all day, kind of that boot camp style. Co-developed by TechPoint, by MT Ray, if you know MT. Jill Lehman had a hand in it as well as myself, and it's a great program. We'll be doing another cohort probably in March or April. We're still working on the calendar for the next one.
Is there a price tag that you can share on that?
For TechPoint member organizations, it's $5,000.
Okay.
For non-members, I think it's $7,000.
Okay.
But I'd have to check to be sure.
And you would consider that more of a 201, 301 class in terms of the depth of curriculum?
If you participate in that, you bring a project with you and you work on a project during the sessions. The morning session is always content. The afternoon session is dedicated to working on your project with this great group of advisors to help drive you through that project by the time you get to the end.
Thank you. Jeff has run the NDCIO network for a decade here in Indianapolis. He and his group were critical in getting this group off the ground so many years ago. So I love the work he does. He's a good friend, and I would encourage you to give this some consideration if that sort of leadership training is a good fit for you. Our next meeting is January 17th. As I mentioned, I've got one speaker nailed down where I should have the other speaker nailed down by the end of the week. All the dates are up on the website, so be aware of that. Third Tuesday, like always, I believe that's the day after Martin Luther King Day, which, it tends to fall on that. But be here. It's important. And the January meeting is always a good one. I think we get a fresh start, so we hope to see you there. Other events. First of all, I want to thank Raquel Richardson and Centric Consulting for hosting the IT Leaders Happy Hour last month. There was 45 people there. I was unfortunately not able to attend, but it was amazing. You want to talk just a little bit about it, Raquel?
Well, sure. Well, it was fun, definitely. It was one of those events where you have about 55 people register, and I was like, well, it'd be great if 30 showed. And so you all showed up big time. It was, like you said, 45 people there. See a lot of faces that came out. So thank you for that. And we did similar to this, right? We met new faces. We helped people connect. I introduced somebody that I met there that night yesterday for a role. So this works. Keep doing it.
Yeah, it's super important. I cannot, the old saying, I've said it many times, the best time to network is 2 years ago. The second best time is right now. So don't forget that. There is a high likelihood we will do another happy hour in the March timeframe of next year, maybe February, maybe March. Working on the details of that right now. So take advantage of that. Not all of these have to be formal meetings. I think it's a great opportunity, and Ale Emporium has good beer and good wings and good pizza. Eric Flick, a longtime member, couldn't attend today, but he did want to remind those of you who are in Indiana InfraGard, the security organization, that there will be a December 15th meeting. If you or your security team has interest in getting together with other like-minded people, this is a great event to attend. If nothing else, it'll give you perspective on security. It's difficult, right? It's getting worse. It's way more complex than it used to be. It'll be down in Columbus, so if you want to go see the cool architecture and make a meeting, then there's this event as well. A couple of other things I want to talk about. We did our first IT Leaders Louisville meeting at the end of September this year, and 31 people attended, and it was great. We had local speakers just like we did here. Format was the same. They're very excited. We're going to do 4 quarterly events there starting in February. We'll do every third month down there, and the feedback has been fabulous. The cities are very similar in terms of the IT community. It's kind of a small town, big city, and I just couldn't, I can't tell you how cool it was to see everybody and how engaged they were. And thanks to Centric Consulting for driving so much attendance at that first event. Finally, gratitude to Expedient, the folks who host us and let me spend my time and their money on this event for 6 years now. We're a cloud and co-location and disaster recovery and multi-cloud services provider. You saw the data center rooms as you walk in every time. For them to allow community outreach like this on an ongoing basis and to stay committed to it is very, very, very unique. I think it shows not only what we do, but who we are as a company. Finally today, our first guest speaker is going to be Dimple Shah. Excited to hear both of these talks, and our second guest speaker is Glenn Keller. Dimple, let me do the AV work, and it's all yours.
Okay, I'm Dimple, and I work as an enterprise Agile Coach at Optum. I am incredibly thankful for this opportunity. Thanks, Doug. And more so because I'll be speaking alongside with a leader who not only walks his talk all the time, but he's also a huge Harry Potter fan like I am. It took you like 3 seconds to figure out.
Yes.
How do I know? My husband and I, we often talk about our worlds collide. So for those Seinfeld fans, they know what I'm talking about. For those who don't know what I'm talking about, I can explain to you after the session. So yes, this is me. Please do reach out on LinkedIn. Would love your connection. A little about me. I am one of those privileged ones who has 2 homes. I'm originally from India, and the United States has been my home since the past 17 and a half years. This is my cute little family here. I have a 6th grader. Love the mom life because he's really low maintenance. He spoils me more than my husband spoils me. So we had a coffee discussion. I'm extremely loyal to my coffee as well. We had that discussion at our table. I love reading, love music. I have no pets, one of the most common questions I get. And any idea what the Slinky stands for? I'm sorry? Yeah, what does that Slinky stand for? Hint, that's why I'm here. One of the reasons I'm here. Agility, right? The most, I like this, and you'll know why as we move on. So, I'm not really here because I'm an Agile Coach. I'm here because I have often experienced that what you say or what you discuss or what you talk about is often forgotten, but the way you can make someone feel, it's something that you can never forget. And I'm maybe here to get you a different lens in that bubble, that balloon that Doug mentioned about. So yeah, really you, but maybe a different lens. And I'm here to make you a little uncomfortable, if I may. And hopefully, at the end of this session, you'll walk out with some motivation and some real action items about the 2 mindsets that we always talk about. What are those? Diversity and agility, right? And how do they come together? Well, I invite you to join me with an open mind. And feel free to interrupt, discuss, share your thoughts, because that's what I hope to achieve in the next 26 minutes. So, the first thing I want to make you uncomfortable about is talk about privilege. Right? there are certain words that just trigger these things within us. And one of those words I've experienced is privileged. The very fact that you're here, you're privileged. Get a plus point. You're a woman of color, you get a negative point. You're a woman, you get a negative point. You have insurance, you have a positive point. Right? You know what I'm talking about. And I want you to now just maybe, please, take a deep breath. If you're comfortable, maybe close your eyes. If you're not comfortable, keep them open. That's fine. Just take a deep breath and think when I say diversity, what happens within you? Are there certain words that pop up in your mind? Are there any memories, good or troubling, associated with this word? Does this word generate some kind of feelings within you? What kind of emotions does this word stir up within you? I'm sure you have plenty of experiences. Now the reason, like I said, I'm here is because both of these topics I'm really passionate about. And when I first entered this world of agility, which was completely by accident, and the Agile Manifesto I came across the Agile Manifesto and the 4 values. I'm like, oh great, I love it, because the first point on there, it talks about individual interactions, and I love people. I'm an extrovert. I'm a people person. I'm always talking and thinking about cultures and everything. Great. But as and when I started getting more experience, self-awareness in this journey, I noticed that the reason why I like that was tied to a lot of my personal experiences as a person, as a multi-dimensional person in another country. And the deeper I dig into agility and agile transformations, I realized that along with the agile adoptions, there are so many agile challenges. And guess what? Almost 50% challenges, where do they lie? According to the 15th State of Agile report, 43% of agile challenges is because of cultural clashes. And why is this being overlooked? Well, I wouldn't say it's completely overlooked. I'd say, why are we not having much successes in cultural changes as much as we hope to, right? So I'm going to help you have this different lenses that look out from outside in into just you, right? That lollipop that he said. Let's think about you, just you as an individual. That's my first lens for you, my first question for you. And don't think about your teams or your organization or where you fit or your role or your title. Just as you. Now, if you see me, when I introduced myself, you saw me as an, okay, I'm an Agile coach, right? Now, think about what would happen if you and I were in a conflict. Who do you see me as? You'll see me as a brown woman. You'll see as a person from India. You'll see as a person who is maybe challenging in that conflict because of my bias. And we can't say no because this happens. This has happened to me. Before I came on this awareness journey or agility journey, whatever you call it, no idea how many times in case of conflict I'd be like, oh my God, male chauvinistic person. Right? Even though if it feels like it happened like years back, I know it happened. And And the reason why I'm sharing is right now I'm not proud of it, but when I think about that Dimple way back when, it was justified that she would feel that way. Because I was in the minority, I still am, in a male-dominated society. But now I don't let that blind spot or unconscious bias drive my behavior, right? We all have these blind spots. Well, they are blind for a reason. We can't see them, we are blind to them, right? The unconscious bias happens unconsciously. I don't choose to go against someone consciously when they present a different view. It's just I'm so unconscious of their behavior. So one of our challenges, what I've noticed, is we often talk about this mindset. And same, now I want you to, when I talk about this, I want you to interchange diversity and agility. Because if you take that to different lenses, it's true for both. We talk about agility mindset, we talk about diversity mindset, and we recognize it. How often do we accept that? How often do we embrace that? Oh, she looks different than me. He looks different than me. He comes from a different place than I am. He might have something that I might not have experienced in my life. And how often can I do that when I don't agree with that person? Just see them as a human being, right? For people who are familiar with psychological safety, that's been my favorite topic ever since I entered the world of agility. And the reason why, I hope these are all pieces of puzzles that are starting to come together at the end of 20-some minutes, because when I started learning more about psychological safety, I was like, okay, well, these are the 4 stages. It starts with inclusion, and as we grow and learn and challenge your safety, feel free to challenge. How many of us have heard leaders say, oh, I want you to challenge me? Oh, don't be afraid of challenging the status quo. You've all heard that. We've all said that. But that's the last step of creating that safe environment. The first step is inclusion. If you don't treat me as a human being, if you don't treat me as a person, how am I going to be able to get through the next 2 steps and be able to challenge you? My personal experience in one of my workplaces, I was new, joined the company, had the typical first day HR interview training. My manager came downstairs, said hello, bye, goodbyes. I again went back into the room. They break for lunch. And I'm standing here in that unknown company not knowing what to do. No one came downstairs. I went into my car in the parking lot, and I ate a protein bar. And came back, finished the first day of training. I felt I was not included. No one cared whether I was here or not. However, I'm used to that, unfortunately, more than you would know, right? So, of course, I showed up back again the next day. The reason why I showed up is because of this manager, because of who I was in that company in the first place, and the one who hired me. And I'm so glad I went there, because I happened to casually share with them when they asked, how was your first day? And I'm like, yeah, I had protein bar in my car yesterday. I'm like, okay. And they made a big deal out of it. Suddenly everyone's coming and asking me, we've been asked to revisit our onboarding checklists or whatever processes. We want you to be a part of it. And I'm thinking to myself, that's why I showed up. Mistakes are gonna happen. I've made so many mistakes. Recognize it, fix it when it comes to you. Now let's talk about how diverse, inclusive, and agile your team is, right? We all talk about hiring new people, hiring people with different ideas and everything. Do we create an environment for them to be a team and help them succeed, right? We're in a group we're in a room having a very sensitive discussion. How many of us have experienced groupthink, right? More hands go up than I would like to see. And we all know that that's the threat that happens because we're a mix of people. I'm an extrovert. I would say before I think. Introverts will want to think before they speak up. How often do we recognize that? And it's not just about extrovert and introvert. Given a particular situation, I may have different experiences back home because of my cultural upbringing, right? I might give you a different perspective. We talk about polarization, and then we talk about innovation. Oh, we are an innovative company. This is an innovative team. Go innovate. Well, guess what is the first thing that happens when the team thinks about innovation? What is the first thing that is involved? When we think about innovation, it's risk, right? Innovation doesn't always succeed. It could fail, but the team feels safe failing. Who's to say? Remember the first steps of that psychological safety? Yeah, you tell people go innovate. Doesn't mean they're always going to succeed. And research shows actually that stress is directly connected to stress producing bosses. It's a proven fact. No matter how much we are going to tell people what to do, it's not going to create the same effect as when people see that you're doing something. Same with kids, right? I often use the example of my child. I can tell him, do this, do that, but he's always watching. So if I say something and my actions don't align, there was an example when in Etsy, when a security hack was caught by someone. It was a story that floated about, I think, a couple of years back. And instead of letting that person go, they actually embraced them, and they could not stop talking about how amazing this person did, just because he had that guts, or he or she, I don't remember who that is, but they had the guts to bring it up. There's a security flaw, this is where we missed. Like, okay, we're gonna fix it. And that's the culture that we're trying to build for the team too. And this creates ripple effect with the organization, right? We all live in a VUCA world. The world is just so volatile. In one of my workplaces, when I came in as a new Agile coach, there was an existing coach, and I started talking to, they were working with the leadership team, and I was supposed to work with the leadership team as well when their contract ended. And they started asking me these questions about, oh, what is your change management approach going to be? And I started asking them questions of what have they done so far. When I started asking them specific questions about what the leadership team had been through, and with respect to building that team, right? Think of a house. A house is built on a strong foundation. I'm not anywhere near to a construction business, but I do know that if you don't spend enough time on the foundation of that house is going to come toppling down very soon. So I started asking, what is this leadership team doing? Did they talk about their personalities and everything? And they said, oh, this is all fluff to me. Like, you're supposed to be an Agile coach. And that's why I have so much empathy for the leadership team, because not many people are ready to help them, take them on a self-awareness journey, right? So one is, at that level, it's hard to challenge them because they don't have time, and they have so many people to report to, board of directors and executives and everything. I hear that, I get that, I feel that. But what happens if that foundation is not strong enough, if there's not self-awareness on how they can walk their talk? That's one. And two, is it's on us as their coaches. Not many people are ready to challenge them. We often are yes people, especially when we are working with the leadership team. Like, okay, you want that? Okay, we can do that, but wrap it up in the box of agility and we'll give it to you. Right? So again, try to think about this when I say agility. Replace it with diversity in your mind. When I say diversity, think about agility in your mind, because they're just so close to each other from what I'm seeing. And if I'm not given an opportunity to help others see that, they're not going to see that. It's very simple. So coaching and self-awareness, at least at this level, at the foundational level of any organization, How many times we're getting interviewed and we ask about the culture and they're like, oh, you're gonna be a great culture fit. Great, but what does that immediately tell me? Like, okay, I have to fit into the existing culture. So what if I don't fit into that culture? Could I be a culture add in addition to that culture fit? Because that tells me that I'm okay asking questions for things that doesn't sit well with me. We often talk with why, and I think we're doing an amazing job with leadership and upper management. They start talking about why, right? After we talk about why, what needs to be done is the next step. Again, think about diversity and agility too. Okay, we want to be an agile organization. What are we going to do? We want to increase diversity. What are we going to do? How often do we stick to how? How are we going to do that? Well, just hiring people who look different than you is not going to do it. Just hiring agile coaches is not going to do it. And leadership and upper management, they often are unable to see or comprehend the cost that is associated with this miss. I read recently in, this is research as current as September 2022. Any guess on how much money is spent globally into DEI efforts? Throw a number. Wild guess. It's huge, hint, but throw a number.
10 billion.
10 billion? Anything else? Any other guesses? I'm sorry?
I would say it's more.
More? 19 billion. Billion with a B. So if everyone is spending $19 billion, and agility numbers are even higher. I don't even care to look at that because we all know how it's the new in thing, right? If $19 billion are spent into DEI efforts, my question is, why is it not working? What I have seen is it's not working because they are checkboxes. Agility, agile transformation is a checkbox. Diversity, I heard someone who looks different than us, comes from a different place than me, check. How many people are diverse in leadership, in top level of your organizations? If you don't know that, I encourage you to look into it and find out for yourself. And then, how has that made a difference other than those town halls or those talks or those unconscious bias trainings? Research also shows, by the way, that those trainings don't stick. The maximum time that the training, unconscious bias training sticks is probably 4 to 6 weeks. And then people go into their comfort zone back again. Yes, because of that conflict that I talked about when we first started, remember? It is basic human nature that when you're put in a situation that is uncomfortable, you go back to your comfort level. That is what stress does to your brain. And that is exactly what happens. In conflict, the training just goes out of the window. And that's okay. That's not the people's fault. That's not what I'm trying to do here. I'm just saying that why can't we try to put in more thought and more effort and be more deliberate and be more intentional about, one, why are these trainings not working? Two, is okay, how can we fix it? And then just do something about it. Rather than hiring more coaches for agility. Agile transformation didn't work, okay, we'll go get another coach. Or we'll adopt another framework. You see now how I feel like, I hope you're beginning to see what I'm saying now. On how they are two peas in a pod. So my son, Dhairya, last year we were talking about, well maybe earlier this year, we were having some conversations about people, right? I try not to be that coach for him, oh my gosh, but he's just such a curious brain. I love his questions, I love answering these questions. And we started talking about one of their teachers who people don't like, his friends don't like her. He's like, Mommy, but I do like her. And then we started, I have no idea how we got to this discussion where he says, but Mommy, everyone carries a backpack. Good or bad things. Like, yes, buddy, Can I just write it down? And I actually wrote it down in quotes so that maybe because I can remind him in maybe 3 or 5 years or 6 years when he needs to hear that this is who you are, don't change, buddy. So my humble request to you is if there is nothing else that you can take away from this, you know how often we attend all these talks and all these sessions and it's just amazing, it's great. But we have time and you have some papers, pen, or you have your cell phones. Let's take about 30 seconds and write down some tangible next steps for each of those 3 dimensions that we talked about. What are you going to do about your own mindset? What are you going to do when you go back to your teams or when you have a team? And 3, what is your contribution going to be towards the mindset shift in your organizations? I invite you to write down some tangible steps so that when you look back in maybe 3 months, like who you are today, and you look at yourself in 3 months, you visualize yourself, what am I going to do in 3 months on a Tuesday morning? Then you see that, oh yeah, this was not one of those sessions where I heard it was great, hopefully, but you know, in 3 months, this is one thing that I did what she asked us to do. I see several of you have started writing. I thank you for that. Let's take 30 seconds more. Thank you so much for doing that. The other thing that I always tell my child, poor thing, he's willing to listen, right? He's 11. So a lot of my dump is on him. But he's amazing because when I tell him things, he actually asks questions. And one of the things I told him the other day is, buddy, do you upgrade your iPad? You have a new version that comes out, right? You update your iPad. I update my cell phone for the most current iOS. People should not be uncomfortable, and they are. I know I was. When I got all these awareness around my own blind spots, I was just so terribly uncomfortable recognizing them, one, and then accepting, and then doing something about that. And just like we upgrade our devices, time and again, we need to update our mindset and our behaviors. And it's okay to do that. Maybe just by yourself, or maybe take a help, or find a sounding board, or find a mentor or a coach, or whatever works with you, or a family member. But please, pretty please, if there's just one thing you have to pick and choose from this session is let agility and diversity not be a checkbox for you and for people around you. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks.
Okay, we're going to get started. Happy to see everybody here today. So, the ships that you're seeing on the screen right here, these ships were destroyed, sunk, on December 7th, 1941, when the Japanese attacked the U.S. fleet at Pearl Harbor. And it was one of the biggest failures in military history. It was a failure to communicate, it was a failure to drive clarity and alignment, and it was a failure to have the correct person in the job that was needed. Okay, Dimple talked about checklists. Here's checklists we've all seen, right? This is leadership checklists. We've seen these all over the place. LinkedIn, leadership training, blah, 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 blah. The lists keep getting longer and longer. And guess what? We're supposed to do this stuff 24/7 by 365. No matter what else is going on in our organizations, right? There's mergers, there's acquisitions. We get bought by private equity, whatever. Good news. There's a bonus round. Anybody want to guess what the bonus round is? I'll give you a hint. It's been going on for the last 2.5 years. Yeah, that's right. A global pandemic. Yay. How the hell do you lead through that? There's no checklist, right? What about social unrest? What about election chicanery and all kinds of stuff there? Oh yeah, and oh man, maybe there'll be a nuclear war because of Ukraine, right? These are all things that are on everybody's minds that are in our organizations. Leadership doesn't happen because of a checklist. It happens because you're down in the trenches, dealing with people and the problems that they bring to the team every day. And Karen will recognize this team. This is a real team, right? You may have to deal with someone on your team passing away. God forbid you don't, but it happens. Or you might come in the office one day and a young mother walks into your office, sits down across from you, looks you in the face and says, "Do you think I should leave my husband?" And you know what, Jeff? She expects an answer, right? That's why she's there, not to tell you about it. Or maybe you have to convince a team of people to pick up their families and move across the country with you because your company restructured the organization. That would be shocking, wouldn't it, Brian? Yeah, Brian and I both worked for the same company for a while, right? Or, this is hard to talk about, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. You're standing in a hospital corridor, and you're standing with an employee and her husband as they're realizing that their child is not going to make it. And the reason that you're standing there in this most intimate moment, in probably the worst day of their lives, because this is one of the families that you've moved across the country. And besides you and their teammates, they don't know anyone else in this strange city. So in this situation, yeah, don't tell me you're not family with your employees, because you are. Or in a more prosaic situation, a CEO points his finger in your face and says, "I don't want to hear it again." But you know what? You look at him and you say it again because you know the idiot has to hear it again. That's how leadership works. Leadership doesn't come from a checklist, Dimple, right? It comes from here at the moment. It comes from here, or it comes from your head up here. FDR said, "Tell Nimitz to get the hell out to Pearl and don't come back until the war is won." So do you know what kind of order is that is? That's a do not retreat order. That's a potential death sentence. He means it. That's leadership in a moment, and that's why we talk about leadership in war. It's not because we like war, it's not because we want to glorify war, but for God's sake, we need to learn from it. And there's an obligation to learn from it. I have a particular interest in the Pacific War during World War II because my uncle served aboard the battleship USS North Carolina. He was at every major engagement in the Pacific War, including when the ship was torpedoed by a Japanese submarine. On a port visit to the Brooklyn Navy Yard, he met my aunt, and they were married for 55 years. So there you have it. Whole segment of my family brought to you by the US Navy. So first thing I want to talk about is waste. There are all kinds of people in this country that wanted to fight for this country even though they were second-class citizens. Why? Because this was their home, and because they believed America was still a better idea than a Nazi future, right? Or a future run by crazy Japanese imperialists. People like the Tuskegee Airmen, people like Navajo code talkers, or Japanese Americans. When I met these guys in 2009 at the World War II Memorial in Washington, I thanked them for their service. The guy on the left here puts his arm around me, goes, "You're welcome." And then he points at the Japanese American and he says, "Let me tell you something. This right here is the bravest man you will ever meet." I didn't ask him what he did, but I sure as hell believed him. Speaking of bravery, this is Doris Miller. Doris Miller was a ship's cook. It was one of the few jobs that African Americans were allowed to fill in the US Navy. Sure, they could have their ships blown out from under them. They could be vaporized by a 16-inch naval shell, or, glory, they could be eaten by sharks alive, right? But they could not fill a combat rating. That didn't matter to Doris Miller. Doris Miller, during the attack on Pearl Harbor, dragged his captain off the bridge of the burning USS West Virginia. Then when he was done with that, he manned a mounted weapon for which he was not trained and started shooting at Japanese planes. For that, in this picture, he's being awarded the Navy Cross. That's the highest honor the Navy can award. Well, almost. Later this decade, the US Navy is going to launch the USS Doris Miller, CVN-81. You can talk about medals all you want, but in our Navy, in the US Navy, there is no greater honor than having a nuclear aircraft carrier named after you. So, if we're going to talk about waste, we got to talk about 50% of the population that no matter how bad they wanted to fight, were not allowed to, women. And it wasn't like they weren't in harm's way. So this group of women right here was just released from a Japanese prisoner of war camp after 3 years in captivity. A lot of women wanted to fly, and a lot of women wanted to fly combat in particular. They weren't allowed to. The best they could do is this thing that we call the Women's Air Force Service Pilots, basically ferry pilots. They're allowed to fly planes back and forth across the US. It was important work, but it wasn't what they wanted to do. General Hap Arnold, head of the US Army Air Force, was afraid that they couldn't handle heavy bombers. Well, here's a woman flying a B-26 Marauder. It's a medium bomber, twin engine. Here's an all-female flight crew just getting out of a B-17. This is the heaviest airplane we had in our inventory. They were pretty happy. They didn't have any problems flying in B-17s all the time. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, Stalin was like, you want to fight? Come on down, right? Here's, these two women belong to a bombing group that the Germans nicknamed the Night Witches. How good were they? The Germans put a price on their head. This one cracks me up. This one is a fighter ace. Her name's Lilia. And look at the description here. She loved to buzz the airbase. She loved to fly close to the control tower just because it pissed off her commander. Forget about Tom Cruise. He's not Maverick. She's Maverick. They were also in the infantry. They were in tanks. Here's one that's a military policeman directing traffic in Berlin. This woman was nicknamed the unseen terror of Prussia by a Canadian newspaper after she killed 60 men. And she's not even the best sniper. The Russians had that was female. There was one that came close to 300, but the picture's kind of blurry, so it didn't really work out. And let's not forget the Pacific. This woman's a captain in the Philippine Resistance, and she's showing an American officer, well, you know, this is how I cut the throat of a Japanese person when I find them. So don't tell me they couldn't fight. So I said that I would get back to these ships. And I also said that this was a failure. But not talking about an American failure, I'm talking about a Japanese failure, because the attack on Pearl Harbor from the Japanese standpoint was a complete cluster. And I'll tell you why after we talk a little bit about the people involved. So this is the brainchild of Admiral Zuruku Yamamoto. And this is quite a guy. I mean, you can tell from this description. I mean, this guy's a party animal. He's charismatic. His men love him, etc. Big risk taker. He threatened to resign if the attack on Pearl Harbor wasn't green-lighted by the Japanese military. So it gets green-lighted. So he's in overall command. Under him, in tactical command, is Admiral Chuichi Nagumo. Nagumo is basically everything that Yamamoto is not. I mean, he's really conservative. He's a solid admiral, but he's not a risk taker. So I'm trying to imagine the discussion that went on in Japanese military headquarters. Should we send Nagumo? Well, let's see. He's got a few comments. This is a really risky operation, and this is a risk-averse guy. It's going to involve 6 of our best aircraft carriers. This guy has very little carrier experience. He hated the plan. He thought Pearl Harbor was stupid. And by the way, his health is starting to fail a little bit. But you know what? On the plus side, he's been around a while, so let's just say. The results were predictable. Okay, they achieved surprise. The aircraft carriers weren't there. That's what happens when you throw a risk. First risk already lost. Basically what they did in the first wave of attacks is they sank some old, slow battleships in a shallow harbor without destroying the repair facilities, or the fuel depot for that matter. You're probably thinking, ooh, oh, that thing's gonna sink. It's already sank, it's sitting on the floor. That's how shallow the water was right there. So the Japanese launched a second wave. The second wave was a complete mess. Right? Pilots are circling around, they're not following directions. Everybody wanted to attack the battleships, right? Even though the battleships are already sunk. they got absolutely nothing accomplished in the second wave of the attack that did any good. So now, Nagumo's staff is begging with him, pleading with him, please launch a third wave. We've got to destroy the repair facilities. We've got to take out the fuel depot. But now Nagumo was nervous. He was afraid that he was going to lose one of his carriers. So he just turned the fleet around and sailed home. After the war, they discovered Yamamoto's diary, and in his diary he said he had been willing to lose 2 aircraft carriers on the attack on Pearl Harbor. How does Nagumo not know that? Did he not tell him that? Or did Nagumo just decide to ignore it? Who knows? We'll never know. Either way, all they did was create a big mess for themselves. A few years later, Nagumo regretted what happened, because when he was defending the island of Saipan, where he would die to please his emperor, he noted to a colleague that the battleships surrounding the islands that were killing all of his men were the same ships that he had sunk at Pearl Harbor. And if you're wondering if you're going to see these guys again, the answer is yes. They're going to show up again. So let's talk about fundamentals a little bit. And let's talk about fundamentals, Japan versus the US, beginning of 1941. The Japanese were great at all the flashy stuff, right? They're great at night tactics, coming in with torpedo drills with their destroyers, had really sharp uniforms, their ships were beautiful, could drill in formation together. The Americans, not so much. We didn't really have any of that. We needed work. However, what the Americans were good at was the really boring stuff that the Japanese hated. We were great at logistics. We were really good at search and rescue. We were amazing at damage control. And intelligence was just off the charts compared to the Japanese. These were things the Japanese were terrible at. They didn't think they were important, and they paid for it very shortly, starting at the Battle of Midway. Look here. We've got the band back together, right? The same thing. Another I'm going to resign moment if you don't do this from Yamamoto, and guess who's in charge again? Nagumo on the scene. So, Midway was supposed to be a good old-fashioned bushwhacking, right? The Japanese are going to lure us in by attacking the island of Midway. We're going to send our fleet there, and then they're going to rush in with their fleet and destroy it. Well, we turned the tables, and we ambushed the ambushers. So how did we do that? Fundamentals. First thing, intelligence. We could read their codes, and they didn't even know it. So we knew when they were coming, we knew where they were attacking, we knew what they were attacking with, we even knew that there was a diversionary attack that we didn't fall for. On paper, we couldn't lose. I mean, really. So as soon as the battle started, other fundamentals came into play, like damage control. So the Japanese did severe damage to the US carrier Yorktown. But within an hour, we had the Yorktown back up, underway, and launching planes. We damaged 4 Japanese aircraft carriers. They weren't able to save not one of them. And then search and rescue. The US we were able to pick up most of our downed flyers. The Japanese, they lost so many pilots and so many aircrew that they never recovered through the end of the war. A few years after, or actually it was 1943, we sent a flight of P-38 Lightnings to kill Yamamoto. How did we know where he was? Fundamentals. Good intelligence on our part, bad radio discipline on the part of the Japanese. Fun fact, we almost let Yamamoto live. I mean, it was a serious discussion because his plans were so bad, we were concerned that they would replace him with someone better. But then we said, this is really gonna piss off the Japanese, so let's kill him. So we did. Okay, we gotta talk about General Douglas MacArthur. Really interesting character. One of the most controversial military figures, certainly in US history, maybe anywhere. So some said MacArthur had a reputation for being like more of a monarch than a general, like he had more of a royal court, that he actually had a staff. Pretty legit. I mean, after all, his office is called the Palace, and it was in the Palace Hotel. But he had another reputation, and that reputation was that he was maybe a little bit of a coward. Some of his troops on the Philippines called him Dugout Doug, implying that he was afraid to go up the front lines, which wasn't true, by the way. He was in the front lines. He was no coward. And none other than George Patton, who is no person's coward, served alongside MacArthur during World War I. And in his biography, he's quoted as talking about MacArthur under fire, and he just says, the guy was nuts. He's crazy. He exposed himself to fire all the time. Another good thing that MacArthur had going for him was his relationship with the Filipinos. He had a real affinity for the Filipino people. He respected their culture. He genuinely liked them. He said, give me 10,000 Filipinos and I will conquer the world. And he meant it. And the feeling was mutual. And that was a huge strategic advantage for the U.S. Because even after the Filipino and U.S. Army surrendered in the Philippines, the Filipino people never stopped fighting. Only about 20% of the Philippine Islands were actually occupied by the Japanese. The rest was just a guerrilla mess that they never really quite got settled down. So, here's where we start laying a little blame on MacArthur. So MacArthur, true to his ego, did not like the plan that we had for the defense of the Philippines. Right? We were supposed to evacuate Manila and head up into the hills and then fight from Bataan. He didn't like that plan. He had his own plan. You know what? He never got around to fully implementing it, probably because he was bored by defensive things. So when General Marshall, the head of the U.S. Army, knocked on his door and said, dude, implement Rainbow 5 right now, MacArthur dithered, and he frittered away time, and his entire incredibly huge Air Force was completely destroyed on the ground. That was on him. Now, for the rest of the war, he did do an admirable job, but where MacArthur really shone, and where I think he saved his legacy, was in the post-war. So when the Japanese delegation went to meet his staff in the Philippines to talk about how we were going to occupy their country, right? What are the what are the things that they're going to have to do? This is not a negotiation, right? These are orders, right? This is what you're going to do. They expected harsh treatment, but they were surprised. The first thing we did was we flew in the air on a VIP aircraft, the C-57 right here, C-87 right here. There's mess stewards to take care of their every need. They were served a nice lunch. In fact, the Japanese, being culturally sensitive, or trying to be, tipped the mess stewards, even though they were in an army uniform, because they thought, well, I guess in America you tip everybody. So during the discussions in the afternoon, the Japanese raised some concerns that some of the language in the occupation orders might offend the Japanese and it might make them harder to cooperate. MacArthur had the wording changed because he understood, right? Cooperation is a good thing, and he respected the Japanese culture. That night there was a dinner, and you can only describe it as a banquet. One Japanese attendee, years later, said that he had warm memories of that evening with MacArthur's staff. How the hell does that happen? Right? How do you go, you're talking to your conquerors, you're talking to the people that subjugate your country, and this is a one-way meeting, this isn't a negotiation. Right? How do you have warm memories of that? MacArthur. He made it clear that, hey, we were enemies then, we're not enemies now, let's get on with the job and rebuild your country. The Soviets had the bright idea and tried to say, you know what, we should help govern Japan just the way we're helped governing Germany. And MacArthur just told him to take a hike. He said, thanks, but no thanks. Never heard boo from them again, because not even Stalin was going to argue with MacArthur. The position that we occupy in the Pacific today is largely down to MacArthur, I believe. We have strong alliances with Australia, with the Philippines, and most especially with Japan, of all things. And Japan has one of the most powerful navies in the world. So I hope we can keep that alliance. Let's talk about Admiral Bill Halsey. Another colorful character. He vowed to ride Hirohito's white horse through the streets of Tokyo. I mean, the press loved this guy. How could you not? He was pugnacious. He was aggressive. He was everything that the country wanted to hear in the early parts of the war, right? We were mostly on the defensive. This was a time for innovation. It was a time for shooting from the hip, and those were his strengths. In the early part of the war, he conducted carrier raids on Japanese bases just weeks after Pearl Harbor. He was the commander of the task force that launched the Doolittle raid. And then he was sent to save the invasion situation on Guadalcanal. Guadalcanal, in my mind, was the turning point of the war because after the Japanese lost on Guadalcanal, they never expanded again. From then on, from 1942 on, they were on defense the entire time. But then things got more complicated. The fleet got a lot bigger. Communications, coordination, planning became more important. And this was an era where Halsey started to make mistakes. He was made commander of the U.S. Third Fleet. The U.S. Third Fleet, surprise, right, had a reputation for being aggressive and opportunistic. Flagship was Battleship New Jersey. His counterpart, the Fifth Fleet, was Admiral Raymond Spruance. Fifth Fleet had a reputation of being steady, stick to the mission, get the job done. His flagship, USS Indianapolis. Give you some idea of how powerful the U.S. Pacific Fleet was. If, this has never been a war game, but I'll fight you to the death on it. If the U.S. Pacific Fleet had met the Normandy invasion fleet at sea, it would have vaporized the Normandy invasion fleet out of existence. Who knows the difference between the U.S. Fifth Fleet and the U.S. Third Fleet? Anybody? Go ahead.
Third Fleet was Halsey, Fifth Fleet was Spruance.
Yes. You know any other difference?
That's all I know.
Well, that's all there is, right? That's the only difference, right? It was the exact same ships, the exact same sailors. It was the fifth when Spruance was in charge. It was the third when Halsey was in charge. Don't feel bad if you didn't know that, because even the Japanese were confused for a while. Can you imagine what they were thinking? Oh my God, there's two of these? Right. Same exact situation. Different commanders, completely different cultures, depending on who was in charge. So, the Battle of Leyte Gulf. This was the biggest battle, naval battle in the Pacific War. I think it might be the biggest naval battle in history. So in this battle, the Japanese used Halsey's aggressiveness, because they knew it was the Third Fleet, they knew he was in charge, to lay a trap. So we're busy invading the Philippine Islands at Leyte. We had a huge invasion fleet that needed protection. The Japanese suckered Halsey into sailing away with the entire Third Fleet and leaving the invasion fleet to their mercy. They came at the invasion fleet from the north with a strong group of battleships and cruisers. They came up from the south with a strong group of battleships and cruisers. The only thing that saved them was the crazy heroism in the north of some destroyer captains and their crews. This is the USS Johnston. The USS Johnston literally sacrificed itself and the life of most of its sailors to protect that fleet. They weren't the only ones. The Johnston, by the way, was commanded by a Native American named Ernest Evans. The Johnston fought so hard, even as they were going under the waves, their guns were still firing. So the survivors are floating in the water. Here comes a Japanese destroyer. The survivors are thinking, okay, well, that's the end. They're just going to machine gun us right here in the water. We're dead. Because that's what we did to each other in the Pacific. It was absolutely brutal. But instead, the destroyer drew close. The sailors on the destroyer manned the rails. The Japanese captain stood on the bridge, and they rendered a salute. And they sailed on. One destroyer crew in appreciation of what another destroyer crew did. What saved them in the south, here's our old friends again. So these old battleships executed a classic naval maneuver called crossing the T, and they decimated a fleet of Japanese battleships and cruisers. In fact, they created so much carnage they started to run out of ammunition and had to back off. That was the end of the Japanese fleet for the rest of the war. After that, it was just a shadow of itself. Halsey also flew into not one, but sailed into not one, but 2 typhoons. In the typhoons, he lost 3 destroyers. He had major damage to an aircraft carrier. Hundreds of U.S. sailors drowned. Anyone else would have been relieved 3 times over. But Halsey was just too popular to fail. And not only that, the Japanese were afraid of him. So he was useful in that regard. And I mean, he did fight well for the most part. But he did make those 3 crucial mistakes. One big mistake that Halsey had was a blind spot. How many of you have had a blind spot? You don't have to answer. I know I have, right? And somebody usually has to tell you, hey, dumbass, right? Right? This is Captain Miles Browning. Miles Browning was Halsey's blind spot. My assessment of Browning, and probably everyone else's too, was he had a toxicity level of 10 and an actual redeeming qualities level of 0. Don't take it from me though. Take it from Admiral Ernest J. King, Chief of Naval Operations, who himself was no walk in the park, trust me, said of Browning, Browning was no damn good at all. He had no brains and no understanding. And Halsey just couldn't see it. He thought this guy was, this is the left-hand, right-hand man I cannot live without. Browning made so many mistakes, I can't even mention them all. I mean, he got people killed. But probably the dumbest and most amusing mistake, and probably the worst for him, was sleeping and actually getting caught in the act with the wife of a fellow officer. Now, unfortunately for Browning, that fellow officer happened to be a champion boxer, and Browning just took a tremendous beating. Nobody felt bad for him. Eventually he was relieved, not by Halsey, but because his superiors had to step in and say, no, you can't have the guy anymore, he's an idiot. So let's talk about how Nimitz dealt with a similar situation. This is Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, also known as Terrible Turner. The nickname ought to tell you something right there. There was one difference between Turner and Browning, though. Turner was absolutely brilliant. I mean, the Japanese were terrified of this guy. They were trying to figure out how to kill him because they knew he was going to lead the invasion of the home islands. But Nimitz was making an informed decision. He said, I know the guy's a pain in the neck, but I'm going to have to work with him. He called him brilliant, caustic, arrogant, and tactless. Just the right man for the job. Just the guy we need. So sometimes you need to put up with a toxic person, but you need to know what you're getting into, and you have to be willing to manage that person. In this case, the mission was pretty important. So I want to leave you with some closing thoughts. Closing thoughts about self-awareness and about ego. You hear a lot about self-awareness. You touched on self-awareness. It's a big leadership thing right now. But self-awareness is nothing unless you can put your ego aside. Years ago, I was helping with a plant startup in Ensenada, Mexico. I was responsible for some computerized production machinery. One night I'm sitting with the plant manager in a restaurant. I'm saying, hey, you know, when the plant gets started up, I ought to come down, we'll have a real party, et cetera, et cetera. He says, well, you better hurry up. So what do you mean? He said, I'm gonna get fired after a couple months. I said, how are you gonna get fired? You're doing a tremendous job. He said, Glenn, these people are running around getting the job done because they're scared of me. He said, that's it. He said, you can't run a plant like that. You have to be a people person. I'm not a people person. This man was wonderfully self-aware. Not only that, he was willing to put his ego aside to get the job done. So remember, self-awareness can save your bacon, but only if you realize when you're over your head, you're not afraid to let somebody else know and ask for help. Thank you. I encourage you to check out my blog and the single video I have on my YouTube channel. And Jeff Tunn's dropping a podcast of Status Go. Yes, in which I completely tear it up.
YouTube.
Yeah, it's bad.
It was a lot of fun, let me tell you.
The 30 minutes you'll regret. Thanks, Steph.
We heard 2 entirely different talks today, really, but there's so much parallel between the 2. I'd encourage you to think about these. We'll be following up with the presentations from both in a follow-up email. I encourage you to focus on your leadership, especially in December when you've got some time to do some planning for the coming year. We've got a slate of great speakers tentatively for the coming year. Do what you can for the people who report to you. They're the reason you're a leader and the reason that your leadership team has got you in the position you're in. Happy holiday to all of you. Thanks for coming.